Yesterday my boss literally ran away from work after quitting. What is the strangest way you've seen someone quit? Not my story, but my boss's. She worked at a very busy downtown restaurant brunch spot and the line would be flooded with tickets for hours on end. One day, one of the line cooks just stopped amidst all the commotion, stood up straight, paused, and grabbed all of the tickets off of the line, scrunched them into a ball, and put them in his pants. He then put his middle fingers up and rotated facing everyone who was watching in horror, and walked out. This has since become one of my favorite stories. Jesus, working as a chef in a cafe that can get busy. Just the thought of all the tickets being gone horrifies me. I used to work at a fast food place in a small town. We had the run of the mill so and so was arrested. Guess he's not working here anymore. Happened more times than I could count. But the best was when someone didn't show up for his shift. The manager calls his phone and he doesn't answer. It goes to voicemail. He changed his greeting to the following: "Frick you, I quit." I always picture these in my head as some bigwig corporate CEO. Imagine some head of a bank quitting this way. It'd be awesome. Like Michael Scott level. Strangest way has to be when a co-worker of mine walked into the head of IT's office, grabbed him by the tie and kissed him. They hated each other. And now I have an idea for a hot, hat-a-frick-filled gay porno. My high school summer job was at Burger King. One year they put me on the schedule when I was supposed to be at a sports camp 6 hours away and I said, "No, I told you like 3 months ago I need those 2 weeks off," and they replied with, "Well, you have to come back to work then go back to camp," and I was like, okay. So I drove back home and quit. When I got home, there was a manager on the phone for me saying that they have a no quitting policy. I was like, okay, well I quit so, followed by awkward silence. Then she hung up on me. Well, since I just quit, policy doesn't apply to me anymore. I quit. We had one of our genetics analysts get arrested for drugging up underage runaways and forcing them into prostitution from his basement. He called in from jail to quit. After the fact, we found out that he had been pulled over like 2 years ago with a teenage runaway in his car and a strap-on around his waist. I think he got some minor possession charge, but the story had made the news because of how bizarre it was. Strangely, nobody in our entire company had heard about it or connected that it was him at the time. He was a very unassuming and quiet man. The prostitution thing made me wonder who his clients were, since he was at the office so much. I was once giving a course at a company HQ in a room overlooking the front door. I was just explaining company law for engineers when the entire IT department left the building with their belongings in black plastic bin bags. Had a guy who worked for me who was awesome at his job but believed in just about every conspiracy imaginable. He would go on vacation and people would ask where he was going and he'd say, "Nowhere. I just need more time to work with my magnets." He'd forward all kinds of stuff about big business suppressing technology, crappy internet videos of people who claimed they had built perpetual motion machines, etc. Sometimes we'd try to point out the flaws in these theories, but mostly we just laughed it off. One morning I came into work, started unpacking my laptop to get started, and he burst into my office with a huge smile and said, "I'm giving you my 2-week notice." I started to speak and he cut me off. "I double checked everything last night, and I've achieved over unity. I just needed a different kind of magnet. That was the key. I'm out of here in 2 weeks." I wanted to resign right away, but my girlfriend said that the polite thing to do was give 2 weeks notice. I guess the world can wait another 2 weeks. I tried to talk him down, but he was insistent. Over the next 2 weeks he continued to work diligently on his remaining tasks, but he had a perpetual smile on his face and declared loudly to anyone who asked that I have solved the world's energy problems and that this is a revolutionary game changer. Someone joked that something this radical might put his life in danger and he responded, "I have taken steps to ensure that if anything happens to me, my invention will still get out to the general public." His last day was almost identical to anyone else's last day at a company they resigned from, only he acted like the happiest person in existence. 3 months later I got an email from him that was entirely in lowercase letters and looked like it was written by a completely different person. It said something like, "Hi Ajundakul, I was wondering if my position had been filled. If not, I was wondering if I could have it back. There is something wrong with my device. I think it's the magnets and I don't have enough money right now to fix it. Need a job, thanks." Whether he got his job, his position had been filled. I tried going through finance to get another position opened, because all crazy aside, he was good at his job, but the VP of development shot it down when it came to him in the approval chain, because he didn't want employees to think they could leave and still have a job to come back to whenever they wanted. But he had a perpetual smile on his face. Sounds like the real perpetual motion machine was right here, in his heart. This was at a restaurant. The general manager of the place was fired for being a scumbag pervert moron. After he was escorted to his car, he drove to the front of the restaurant, got out, ran to the grassy area, and started pulling up handfuls of grass and throwing them at the windows, while screaming like a burnt child. Well then, I hope they reconsidered and gave him a second chance. I used to manage the tech support side of a call center for an ISP. I had one tech come in and put a 6-pack of beer on my desk and said that's that and walk out crying. My supervisor used to tell everyone at my last job they were easily replaceable. He was a former military guy and he tried to run the place military style. He would threaten people, break stuff and make unreasonable demands. So, one day I found a new job and just quit without notice. He got hold of my number and the next day he called me and yelled at me for being unprofessional. He said I owed him 2 weeks. I told him I'm easily replaceable and he should have no problem finding a replacement, then hung up. I should also mention that job had the bare minimum amount of employees to run the place. If someone called out, we would all have to work at least 2 hours overtime to make up for it. If anyone took a week vacation, it was a nightmare. My quitting like that set the place back a few months until they hired and trained a new guy to replace me. Management 101. Everyone can be replaced. Management 482. Not everyone can be replaced at the same cost. It's a long story, but our manager wrote me, my friend, and literally everyone else who had worked that day up because she thought someone stole $20 from her. My friend and I decided to quit, because I'm not going to sign a write-up when I did nothing wrong and she's too stupid to lock her stuff up. I took the paper, simply wrote I quit and handed it back to her. I look at my friend and he looks right at her, just staring at her. Then he slowly crumples up the write-up, puts it in his mouth, and starts chewing, just staring at her. He then turns around, walks to his car, and drives away, still the whole time with the paper in his mouth. It was glorious. I had a friend who worked as a night baker. One night they wrote him up for being disorderly. They were sitting down at one of the tables in the dining area and they slid him the paper. He threw the paper in the air and shouted, "Nope." He then just went back to baking. They didn't fire him and he didn't quit. I don't know how he got away with it. I ran away after quitting. I was hired by a competing company, put in my 2 weeks, and the boss got suspicious. He came by my desk and told me to follow him into his office to sign a non-competing form, basically saying that after I left there I couldn't work for the competition for 6 months. I was crapping my pants as I got up to follow him. At that exact moment, the phone rang. I picked it up and told him I would be there in 5 minutes. Finished up the phone call, grabbed my crap, and hauled butt out the back door. They eventually did find out that I went to work for the competition and he sent me an email saying congrats on the new job. I'll have to stop by for a visit one of these days. My old supervisor at Office Max got removed from the store by 4 police officers. He was arrested on chili pea charges. I got his job after that. This happened at the casino my friend worked at. She's standing there, dealing blackjack. Normal day. All of a sudden, the dealer on the next table over screams, "Blackjack." I win, while dancing and pumping both of his fists into the air. His players are dumbfounded. After his victory dance, he reaches out with both hands and scoops up everything on the table. Everything. Yes, that too. If it was on the table, it got scooped into his bank. Cards, chips, lighters, all of the money the players had sitting on the table in front of them, even the money that wasn't being wagered. After he scoops it all up, he rips off his ID badge, throws it down on top of the pile, and walks off the table, out of the pit, and out the front doors to where his friend was in the car, waiting. It took surveillance hours and hours to sort out whose money belonged to whom. After the fact, she found out that the guy's friend had been out there waiting since the beginning of his shift. It had taken him hours to deal himself a blackjack. TL. DR. Casino employees like to go down in flames. That's dedication. Worked a very fancy French restaurant. The chef was a master chef and thus he had the biggest ego of anyone I had ever met. Chef was in the piano bar talking and having a drink with some horse racing bigwigs. Rancho Santa Fe during track season. Hard working, mild-mannered busser is changing tablecloths. Chef just starts belittling him in front of everyone for a laugh. What the heck, man? I just saw a bit of the table. When you switched cloths you're not supposed to see the actual table. If you grabbed the wrong size tablecloth, fold it back up. Man, you're so dang lazy. There are many different sizes so you grab a variety and use it on the next table if it was wrong. Chef said something else and laughs with a jockey, some hot women, and some guys with back pockets thicker than George Costanza. I forget what he said that made everybody laugh, but this 20 years old behemoth of a busser takes his apron off and throws it at Chef. Chef stands up from the booth like he's P and is yelling about how he will lose his job. Busser goes, frick this job and frick you, you German T, and decks Chef right in the chops in the middle of the busy piano bar, then walks to the back exit, grabs a tray full of buffed Riedel stemware and chucks it into the wall and leaves. It was pretty rad. I had planned to quit a job once, and it just didn't take. I picked up a third job at a cafe during undergrad that required me to be in a 630 am. I thought I could do it, gave it a try for a few weeks, but it was quickly becoming apparent that I liked drinking and sleeping in on Saturday a whole lot more than the extra cash. Anyway, I woke up, hungover, in a beautiful girl's bed and decided, frick it, I'm not going in, and went back to bed. I know, I should have called, but I was 20 and working 2 other jobs in addition to taking courses full time. When I wake up again at around 9, I have a couple of voicemails. I expect the "don't bother coming in again, we'll make your last check" message, but instead, it's the owners apologizing because my co-worker had been attacked, mugged on her way to work, and they figured I must have shown up already, seen the closed cafe and just gone home. I didn't have the heart to tell them, so I went in the next day, worked and gave notice. To clarify, she was attacked by her home, not work, ETA. During the investigation, police discovered that work had been conspiring with home. Both these predators are off the streets and behind bars. I hope she was able to press charges against her home and send it away for a long time. A few years back, a guy got dragged out of one of my old employers in cuffs. After being read his rights, he looked right at the horrified owner and said, "Well, I guess I quit." Didn't expect it because he was shirt and tie boring in his 60s, but apparently shirt and tie boring guy was also a wife beater. The boring ones are always the craziest. 2 managers, one who looked like Ross Perot and one who looked like John Candy, were leading a beating when police came in and arrested them. Turns out they took a trip together to the next town over and beat her nearly to death. Something planes, trains and automobiles. Worked in a supermarket as a cashier when I was in high school. A few of my good chums also worked there as well. Cue up the crazy lady who goes to my friend, who is having a rough day to begin with, at the register behind me, puts all her crap up and he rings her up. She notices a lobster she had gotten was somehow missing and accuses my friend of stealing it. He then says, "Lady, are you kidding me? Why would take your lobster?" She then proceeds to yell at him and demands compensation in some form. He's had enough and yells, "Frick this crap, I'm out and lady, frick you and your lobster," proceeds to walk out of store and punches a wall, putting a hole in it and knocking a display shelf over as he exits with her wide-eyed, and the store is silent. Turns out her lobster was left at the seafood counter. I wish stuff like this would happen more often. People need to realize that employees are real people, too, and usually can't do anything about your particular problem. I feel like if the employee just quit every time someone started acting like an unreasonable butt, then everyone would mellow out. I had to fire an employee after I caught her sleeping in her cubicle multiple times and then telling me that asking her to assist in other areas when we were slow was not her job. Her mom came in afterwards and came storming into my office up in a huff. Picture this, a 40-year-old black woman, in pretty good shape, in skin-tight leopard leggings with gigantic gold high heels on, oversized sunglasses and cornrows in her hair, screaming at me, "You just a frickin' sectarian. I'ma send my lawyer at you and he gonna sue you." But we got a racial discrimination suit on our hands. I just looked at her the whole time and never said a word. After which she stormed out of the building screaming, "You're a bunch of fricking xenophobic in here. You're a bunch of fricking xenophobic in here." I once had some guys who tried to start a fight with me and my friends pee out on the fight by saying, "Frick it, let's go. These N is calling the cops." We all dissolved into fits of laughter. My first job out of college was at a medium-sized company with a small IT staff. There were just 6 of us programmers until we hired the new guy. We were using this obscure language which you couldn't really hire for without paying through the nose, so they decided to do OTJ training for this. So the new guy was a little older than me, but had no experience outside of teaching. He was nice, sort of quiet, and a little quirky. The only thing personal he kept on his desk was this plastic goat. I didn't have anything personal on my desk either, so I didn't think anything of it. Sometimes he would play with it a little, but it mostly just sat in one spot on his desk. Everyone needs some sort of stress relief, I suppose. A few weeks go by, and the new guy seems to be picking up the language fair enough. He had coded a couple of screens, albeit with a little help. One Monday comes up, and he doesn't show at the office. Our boss calls him and says, "You can't just not show up without calling." Not a big deal to me. I mean, things come up. It was just a little unprofessional. The next morning, I get into the office super early, which is unlike me since I was such a late riser. He rolls in around his normal time and is surprised to see me, but I figure it's because he likes a quiet morning. We're there working for a couple hours and the whole time he's fiddling with the goats in his hand. Mid-morning he gets up out of his chair and leaves our little room. An hour goes by and I realize he isn't around to go to lunch, which we all used to do as a group. Figure he must have had something to do. Well, he doesn't show up after lunch. The next day, no call, no show. A weekend passes and still doesn't show, and he hadn't returned any calls. So my boss had to call the police to do a health check on him. He finally sends an email to say he wouldn't be back. We all look at each other thinking, who in the world quits like that? Was this spur of the moment or premeditated? We look at his desk and realize his little plastic goat is gone. He must have come in that morning to grab it, but was surprised by me into staying for a bit to cover it up or something. He hadn't done anything malicious to the code, he just wanted his goat. A guy I knew got an email for a beating in the boss's office. Figuring he was fricked, he starts just destroying computer equipment. Just fricking crap up like crazy. So he goes into the office, sits down, and the boss tells him he needs him to go to a conference someplace, and it'd be all paid for by the company. He didn't get to go to the conference. And this is why companies escort laid off fired employees out the door. My previous company was so awful that we would get new employees sometimes that would get the vibe very quickly and quit within a few days. But the classic was the guy who never came back from his lunch break on the first day. Within his group in our company, his name became a verb meaning to quit at lunch and never come back. So occasionally, you'd hear unfrustrated employees say, "That's it, I'm doing this guy's name." I have 2 stories, one normal and the other not so normal. The first was a bus buy at Red Lobster that had had enough on a Friday night. He was in the middle of cleaning a table. Nobody was talking to him. Nobody was yelling and nobody had had any confrontation with him all night. Suddenly he stood up, yelled, "Frick this place," took off his apron, threw it across the room, and walked out the door. Never saw him again. The weird one was a guy at a place I worked where we had unlimited internet access. A lot of people would Facebook or whatever. Turns out this guy was trolling chat rooms for underage girls. He left for lunch to meet one at the mall and it wasn't a young girl but a bunch of cops. They took him and then came and took the computer he worked on. My ex-girlfriend used to be a pizza delivery driver for a chain pizzeria. One day her boss was giving her guff and she said she quit. The manager said she needed to bring her uniform in. She promptly took off her shirt, threw it at him, she was wearing a bra, then walked out, through a restaurant full of family's customers. My friend quit his job at a corner store by just walking out and never coming back. Before he left, he stashed an open gallon of milk on top of the radiator that hung from the ceiling. What a sour way to leave. After 25 years as an executive with a fairly large corporation, I threw the keys to my company car and my company credit card on the CEO's desk and walked home. Started my own business 4 months later and just retired after 19 successful and blissful years. A friend of mine had some co-workers in their warehouse that didn't get along. One went home for lunch claiming to get Tylenol for a headache. She came back with a gun, shot her nemesis co-worker in the hip as she walked past, then walked up to her and shot her in the head point blank. This woman then headed to the front office, gave the gun to her boss and said she had shot a co-worker, and quit. She waited around for the police to come get her. There has to be a link for an article on that mess. When I quit my job, I left not angrily, but curtly, solemnly walked out of the office, said goodbyes to my co-workers, and made it 2 steps out the door, congratulating myself on my dignity, until I realized that I left all my groceries in the office fridge, went back and, with as much dignity as I could, collected half a loaf of bread, 2 jars of peanut butter, and 4 older apples. I've got one. I was working construction with a small company. It was the old man, his son, a foreman, me and occasionally a day laborer who was the old man's drinking buddy. Being a drinking buddy, he wasn't a great worker. Well, one day the boss had to run for material, so he sent me and the day help to strip a really old roof, which is a horrible job but whatever, while he sent his kid and the foreman to do a little tiny framing job that should have taken about an hour. Well, 2 hours later I'm stripping this roof and I see the hour van go by with the framers in it. I see it pull into a coffee shop about a quarter mile away. I keep working. Well, an hour and a half later they come back with iced coffees for themselves and nothing for us and proceed to stand and watch us work. I yelled down to them, "Where's mine?" The reply was, "Oh, we didn't think you'd want one." Well, that peed me right off, but I kept working, getting dirtier and sweatier as time went by. They watched us for about 10 minutes until the boss showed up. By this time the roof was like 90% done. I was visibly pee off. The boss says something to the effect of Meatloaf. They called me Meatloaf because I kinda look like him. Is just fat, dumb and happy. I replied, "Oh, yes Steve, frick you. I quit. That's not funny. Meatloaf." I said it wasn't meant to be. "Frick you. I quit." I proceeded to climb down and dump about 10 pounds of roof nails in front of his truck, grabbed my crap and left. This was like 9 AM on a Monday morning. I had a week's worth of vacation coming too. By Tuesday afternoon, a friend of mine had offered me a week's worth of work scraping a house to prep for painting for more than I was making roofing. So I did that for 5 days, then started putting in applications. 3 days later, I had a job in an air-conditioned office. So I quit, made better than double what I would have that week and got a much better job. Frick yeah. Good for you, dude. The first department I worked for had an officer who was lazy at best but was mainly just there for a paycheck. His wife had multiple degrees and he often said that he would quit once she found a well-paying job. Apparently she did. One afternoon I was talking to my sergeant when he got a call from this officer. The conversation only lasted about a minute, but in that time he managed to pee the sergeant off immensely. He hung up the phone and looked at me and said, "You're not gonna believe this." Turns out the officer got a call from his wife saying she got hired with some university overseas. So he parked his patrol car at a 711, took off his gun belt and badge and threw them in the trunk, then locked the car keys in the trunk with them and called the sergeant and told him where the car was parked. I waited tables at this upscale, trendy restaurant. One of the waitresses was a pretty serious feminist, active volunteer for Planned Parenthood, equal pay, etc. She was really cool, and feminism was her thing. Anyways, our executive chef was a total butthole, really demeaning, xenophobic prick with a bit of a coke habit. He would throw plates of food around, break glasses, fire people on the spot, etc. One day, as he was walking us through the specials, he informed us that a good friend of his was coming in for dinner and he was to be considered a VIP. The dude came in that night with a bunch of people, like 6 more than the reservation had indicated. All as Jersey-ed out as it gets. He got seated in the waitresses section. Within 5 minutes, she put it together that he runs a chain of strip clubs and adult bookstores in the area, and angrily relayed this information to me. After appetizers and a few drinks, this guy started saying demeaning stuff to the waitress about how her uniform hides her rack and how she should take a 15-minute smoke break with him in his car, etc. In between apps and entrees, the chef had the waitress bring out 2 calmed bottles of wine, which she dutifully did, and upon uncorking them, she poured them both on this guy, spat in his face, and walked out of the restaurant. The entire place was dead silent. She texted me later that night. We celebrated and ended up dating for 3 years. Broke up on positive terms and remain friends to this day. Good times. Awesome. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.